could go better. So let us now look. That's what emotional intelligence is. That's the way to understand it. Now let's look at the neuroscience behind it. And to do that, first I'm going to start and give you a little bit of the anatomy of the brain and where it's put together, and where it's located. And I'm going to use a model called the hand model of the brain that was designed by a Dr. Dan Siegel in the United States. Now, as you're watching me, and if you're not in an open office where you're going to look like you've lost your mind, you could hold your hand up like that. And holding your hand up like that, I want you to imagine that this is your brain. So this is just like me. This is my brain. It's facing forward. And in fact, let me just click this down. There we go. The mouth would be there. So here's your brain. Your mouth is kind of located down there. If we go beneath the skin and we go inside, the arm is really like the extension of the spinal cord. So you got the spinal cord, which is feeding up into the brain. Okay. Now, at the very base of that brain is the oldest part of the brain, often called the reptile brain. It's the brain stem. And it's the part of the brain that was really basically responsible for survival. And it runs all of your autonomic functions. So this is responsible for keeping your breathing, keeping your heart beating, keeping your respiration going, for sweating. All of those things we do without even spending a bit of time thinking about it. This is the part of the brain that continues to function even when people have been severely head injured, and when we say they're brain dead, and yet they're breathing and their heart is beating and so on and so forth. That's the part of it. It's the basic part of the brain that was responsible for keeping you alive, saving you from threats, and keeping your heart beating and so on. If you go deeper into the brain, so you open up your hand like this one, well then in the middle here, and the shape is actually quite similar to this, you've got the emotional brain. That part of the brain developed much later than the reptile brain, and it's the part of the brain that is often called the mammalian brain. It's the part that makes us tribal, makes us capable of feeling for our young and nurturing our young and so on and so forth. Reptiles don't give a sugar. As soon as the eggs are laid, they go on their merry way. We, on the other hand, tend to nurture our young and raise them, and we tend to be tribal and so on and so forth. And that part of the brain is really, it's the emotional brain. Working in concert with this autonomic brain or the reptile brain, it is responsible for a lot of the way you respond to the world. So it developed a little bit later, so it's deeper in the brain. And then when you close down the hands again, what you're closing over the top here is the latest part of the brain to develop. So it's the wrinkly sort of part that you see when you look at the pictures of the brain that's wrapped around the outside. And where we're really interested in is this part just behind the forehead, just here on the knuckles. Okay, so just here on the knuckles is the prefrontal cortex, and that's the part of the brain that essentially makes us Homo sapiens, makes us capable of planning, creating logic, strategizing, and gives us a personality. It's the part of the brain that often gets damaged in car accidents where somebody doesn't have a seatbelt on, and where they have this dramatic personality change, because it's right there is where you and I live. So that's where our thinking brain is. That's where we, if you like, live. So that's the part of the brain that responds when you see somebody doing something under the influence of emotions, and you think, oh my God, what was she thinking saying that to the boss? That's the part of the brain you're working with, and that's the part of the brain you think she should be working with. But in actual fact, what's going on is this part of the brain is in control, and we'll look at that in a moment. One other thing I want to talk to you about are two neurotransmitters, two chemicals that have a very important role for us in our brains as we go about the world, particularly as we go around trying to engage and work with people and we talk about emotional intelligence. And the first one is oxytocin. And oxytocin is often referred to as the trust hormone. It is the chemical that was injected into your brain for the first time when your mama picked you up after you were born. And it's called the trust or the bonding hormone. It makes us want to trust people, to bond with them, to become closer with them, to consider them to be part of our tribe and part of our group. Every time we touch somebody, particularly mostly when the touch is welcome, that touch induces a little injection of oxytocin. When we interact with people, it can also inject a little bit of oxytocin if that's a positive interaction. Now, the other end of the scale, and there are lots more neurotransmitters, these are just the two main movers that we want to talk about because they explain a lot about the way your best boss and your worst boss worked and the effect they had on you, is cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone. When you get a fright, let me see. Ah! Okay. I hope you got a little bit of a fright there, and I'll tell you what happened there in a moment. I just gave you a fright, and you just suddenly got your system, your mammalian brain, this part down here, reacted. And one of the things that happened as part of that was you got a little injection of cortisol. That cortisol is what puts you on edge, and in conjunction with adrenaline and a couple of other things that go on there, it gets you into that fight or flight mode, where in that moment when I screamed at you, you were ready either to run away or to hit me. I'm glad I'm not sitting with you face to face. Trust hormone comes from positive interactions with people that we like and trust and we bond with. Cortisol comes from situations and people that are the opposite, that stress us. So it's obvious that our best boss tended to induce into us more oxytocin than they did cortisol. Now, don't get me wrong. Remember, and you know this, sometimes you do your best work under stress. You tell me if I was face to face with you, say, God, you know what, Deiric? Sometimes it's when I'm under the hammer, it's an hour before the presentation, I do my best work. And that's right. Certain amount of cortisol balanced with that oxytocin in a relationship is a very positive thing. Your best boss probably gave you challenging goals, put you on edge, kept your feet to the fire, but kept all of those other positive messages going. Because, and the reason that worked is that they had a greater balance of oxytocin induced into you over a period of time. You are programmed to respond with more oxytocin than cortisol to the best boss. And so the cortisol, which diminishes the response to oxytocin, wasn't doing any damage. Think of the worst boss. When they walked into the room, and you put your hand up earlier on, somebody walks into the room, what are you having? What's making you go there? It's not your thinking mind that thinks, oh, I don't like them, I feel sad. What's going on there is your emotional brain is reacting. You're being injected with a bit of cortisol that's topping up the cortisol that you got from them before, and you're programmed to react with them in that sort of stressful way. So those are two very important movers. So let's look at how they play out when we look at the way the brain works. And this is you and me and everybody in the world. And let me just grab a couple of pens here. And by the way, I don't want you to do this at home, but if you were to stick a pen in your ear, in fact, if you were to stick a pen in each of your ears, okay, and then stick another pen through your eye, where those two pens crossed, there would be right in the middle of that emotional brain, there's a little almond-shaped organ that I'm sure you've heard of called the amygdala. And the amygdala is like the smoke alarm of the brain. It was what was triggered when I screamed at you a moment ago. If you felt stressed or you jumped, it was what was triggered. It said, there may be a threat here. Absolutely. Here's the key point. Every stimulus, any thought you think, any word you say to yourself, any word somebody else says to you, anything that happens that stimulates you makes its way to your thinking brain via the emotional brain. Everything but everything is filtered through the emotional brain. You may think you're totally objective and totally rational. Believe me, if you're human, you're not. So every decision you make is valenced or balanced or weighted by emotions. It passes through the emotional brain, and the emotional brain says, is this a danger? Is this a problem? Can I eat this with it, or is this going to eat me? Do I need to get away from this? Do I need to fight? It has only two responses. One of them is danger. And danger can come from, in the old days, it would have come from saber-toothed tigers and higher order predators. But today, in our modern world, it can come from things like feeling your status has been pushed down, fear that you're going to be conned or tricked, lack of security, lack of security, loss of control, unfairness. Any of the things that your boss did to you put you into threat mode. And when they put you into threat mode, your body got an injection of cortisol. And the more they put you into threat mode, the more cortisol there was around them. So the more time you spent around them, the more tense you started to become. And tense people, loaded with cortisol, in danger or threat mode, disengage. They close off and they become invasive. And if you doubt me, think of the last time when you were really, really stressed, and the one you love, your husband, your wife, your girlfriend, whatever, somebody said to you, is everything okay? You said something, and I'm paraphrasing, like, leave me alone, I need to work this through. At the very time when you needed somebody more than ever, you disengaged, you pulled away, you closed, and your ability to see opportunities closed down. Because when things are going really bad and we're stressed, all we can see is the fact that things are going bad, and we don't focus upon it. All we can see is they're going bad, and they're going to get worse, and I'm never going to pull out of this. And this is all happening in a blink of an eye. Somebody says something in the middle of a presentation, somebody says something or looks at you strangely, your emotional brain processes in a second, cortisol is released, but more importantly, it sends that message onto the thinking brain, and it takes a finite amount of time. When it gets to the thinking brain, it's saying, we have detected a threat. That affects your feelings, your decisions, and the extent to which you engage. If you've ever met somebody for the first time and you thought, I don't like them, look at what happened next. It may be a completely irrational thing, but look at what happened next. Already your thinking was biased towards decisions and ideas and more open to being confirmed that they're not trustworthy, I don't like them. Something in you reacted to them. And it may have been a good thing that came from your emotional memory, or it may be just a mistake. But either way, by the time that message got to the brain, you were biased against them. That's what the best boss did to you or worst boss did to you all the time. The best boss, on the other side, triggered the only other response, and that's the reward response. And so they triggered you with things like trust, and you said, they made me feel energized, comfortable, happy, motivated, etc. So by providing you with a level of trust, by being trustworthy, by providing you certainty, reliability, approval, sense of belonging, etc., they triggered you into a positive mode. They triggered more oxytocin in your brain than there was cortisol, and so you tended to engage more. You tend to become more connected. You tend to see more opportunities, and that's why when you look at that simple experiment we did, you saw that the best boss and the way they showed up directly impacted the way you felt and the extent to which you engaged. And that, as I say, is emotional intelligence. It's understanding. It's understanding what you intuitively know and what the neuroscience research says. We are programmed as humans to minimize threats and maximize rewards. We move away and we disengage from threat. People are a source of threat response, and we move towards reward response. Emotional intelligence is having the intelligence to understand that you and everybody else make your decisions based upon not just the rational, hard, objective facts, but on how you feel about situations. And then it's managing the way you show up so that you get the desired response in other people. So it's not about the way you do things. It's not about techniques. It's not about processes. It's not about how you do things or how you're doing things. It's about how you go about being, how you show up to people.